Now, the second type of persuasive speeches are what are called questions of value. It doesn't mean we're not using facts anymore, but we are dealing more with issues of right and wrong, of good and bad, of moral or immoral, proper or improper, fair or unfair. We're making moral judgments, and we're trying to promote a certain perspective, a certain moral value or judgment perspective toward our audience. And one of the key phrases I noticed in the chapter is a position morally justifiable? And we're going to tell why our perspective is morally justifiable. So in the informative speech, we are just basically giving information. Maybe you, for example, you gave a speech about elephants, and you were talking about breeding or age or how smart they are, but then you also talked about the hunting of elephants. And you just kind of leave it at that. You're not making a moral statement in an informative speech. You're not telling us whether you agree or disagree, whether it's right or wrong. You're just telling us the facts about how many are killed per year, how many are poached for the tusks. And that's your informative speech. But with a persuasive speech, on a questions of value speech, you're going to make a statement. Is it morally justifiable to hunt elephants for the tusks? And you're going to give us some reasons why it is or it is not appropriate. And it's not just your personal opinion. We're not looking for opinions here. We're still looking for information of why something is morally or not morally justifiable as far as that behavior or that action. And you're trying to accomplish two items here, the textbook tells. First of all, you're going to identify your claim. You're going to clarify in your first point, what is the claim you are making? What does it mean to poach? Is killing animals is hunting appropriate in itself? But you're going to establish the standard of what you are clarifying and what position you're going to take. And then your second main point, you're going to explain how your position lives up to or fulfills that standard that you set in your first point. Let me read to you what I wrote here. Number one, identify your claim or clarify your claim. Make sure that we know what what you mean by an endangered species, what you mean by hunt and kill. Is it okay to capture animals and take them to a zoo if you're not removing the tusks from the elephant? But then second, how does your standard, your point of view, measure up to those standards? How will not hunting elephants or endangered species help to preserve the species? So you're going to establish what you're trying to tell us, and then you're going to tell us how your view measures up. Now, once again, questions of value are organized topically, and here they're suggesting two main points. Clarify your standards and then tell us how yours measures up. Quite often I've heard these speeches done, though, with 3 points, kind of similar to a questions of fact speech, that they will basically say we should not hunt elephants, and then give me 3 reasons why we should not hunt elephants. 3 kind of moral justifications for why we should not hunt elephants, or whatever the topic might be. Okay, so let's go on to talk about the third type of persuasive speech, which is questions of policy. Now, the difference between questions of value and questions of policy, they're similar, is that questions of value express why something is moral or immoral, whether it's why it's right or wrong. Questions of policy are going to lay out for us a plan of action describing what should or should not be done. So it's a little bit different. So a question of policy, I'm reading some of this, presents a case for why a specific plan of action should be taken or should not be taken. When talking about a question of policy, there are 2 types of speeches. So hopefully that made sense what I just said. Question of policy is you're telling us still a point of view, but then you are giving us your plan of action. There's always a plan of action involved in this. How are we going to carry out this action? What policy are we going to take? One of the speeches that you can watch, in fact, I should have posted the different types of speeches you can watch, is a question on phony pharmaceuticals. And the person says, yeah, we should not have phony pharmaceuticals out there, and here is a plan for how we can shut this industry down of all these phony pharmaceuticals. And then lays out a plan. So we're going to talk about that. So there are two approaches to speeches of this category. First of all is where we are seeking passive agreement from our audience. We're not asking them to do anything, change anything, give anything. We're just saying, hopefully from my perspective, you think this plan will work to overcome this problem, and it's okay, yeah, I agree with that. But then there's also what is called immediate action speeches, and this is where you're getting your audience to do something. It would be the difference between a speech on giving blood, where you're simply saying we should all give blood, and here's a plan to increase blood. I know blood is on the short side right now, and so they're having blood drives to get people to give blood. But yeah, we should all give blood, and that's the end of it. But an immediate action speech would be to say, so here's my speech on we should give blood, and then we have a Red Cross van outside, and they'll be glad to have you line up and give blood even today. So it's immediate action, not just mental assent. So that's something to consider in your speech for immediate action. And they also say in the textbook about commitment, that when somebody, my dog's right here, when somebody goes to action with the speech, it will increase their commitment and the how long people will be committed to that issue. And so if you can get them to do action, it is good. And then also it is important that you lay out, if you want somebody to do something, you tell them specifically what you want them to do so they know the action, and then even how to do it. There's a speech, one of the examples is on being involved with Special Olympics. And the example they give there is where at the end of the speech she has some handouts with information, but then also she tells them where, when, and how they can sign up right now to be involved in Special Olympics. So there is, that's an important element of these types of speeches. Now, when you are doing a question of policy, there are three basic issues you need to address somewhere in your speech. The issue of need, the issue of plan, and the issue of practicality. First of all, you want to make sure you convince your audience there is really a need for this. Right now, there is a real need for giving to the Red Cross for blood, and so that is a real need. So how are you going to make it convince your audience of a need? What you consider a need, maybe I don't, and what I think is important, maybe you don't. But how are you going to convince your audience that this issue is a real need so they would agree with you in terms of especially a call to action? For example, toilet paper. I have right now about 100 rolls in the garage, and now when I go to the store, it's on the shelves, at least for a little while. I'm now in the category of 60-year-olds that I can go in early to the store, but some people are going to walk in and say, there's no need, there's plenty of toilet paper. Well, they're the 60-year-olds who get to go in early, so they're not going to be convinced there is a need anymore. So make sure you tell us what that need is going to be. Second is, do you have a plan? Tell us what your plan is. How are you going to put your plan into action? Tell us what it is. How is it going to fix the problem? What strategy are you proposing that we use to resolve this problem? And then number three, is your plan practical? Is it realistic? Is it doable? And they say 2 strategies for that is tell us how, when, where that plan has been tried before in other circumstances, and you're adopting the plan from these other situations. And then also, will this plan create more problems than it currently solves? Because that's really not a solution if it's just creating a bunch of more problems. I'll give you an example. We have out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And somebody has come up with a plan to take these boats out and start cordoning off portions and start taking away the garbage. They figure they can have it done by 2040. Well, I don't know if it's getting any government money, but maybe that the designer of that plan had to go to, they left San Francisco, so did they go to the government there in San Francisco and say, I've got a plan? They laid out the plan. They made it clear. Obviously, the need was there. They laid out the plan. And then is it realistic? Is it realistic to have basically a 20-year plan? They'll have this cleaned up by 2040. Now, if they got $20 trillion to solve the problem, they could probably solve it overnight. But that creates the problem of going bankrupt. So they're saying, well, yeah, so if your plan is to spend $20 trillion, that's not practical. That's not realistic. We can't do that plan. So tell us what the need is, explain the need, convince us there's a need. Number 2, describe the plan, lay it out for us, make it understandable and doable. And then number 3, is it practical? Is it realistic? Okay, so I'm going to stop there with this video.